Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.
Hi, and welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Lori Baker, and with me today is Mary Kate Karr-Petras, Associate Editor, and today we're talking about quilting with preschoolers. Mary Kate has two, and she has lots of wonderful ideas.
Well, I've got a few ideas that have worked for us, and so I thought I'd share them in case they're helpful to anybody else. If anybody else out there is like me, our time to sew is limited these days. Very limited.
Absolutely.
And I know you're always making me feel better when I complain about how little I'm able to get done, it feels like, compared to other people on the staff who are coming in, showing up these great quilt tops, and you say, you have little ones.
That's right.
It's important to spend time with them, which I guess I'm supposed to spend time with them and feed them occasionally.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
But they are getting to an age where they're able to focus on things and not just rip things apart, not cry all the time. That's nice.
And just for a reference point, how old are your girls?
Okay, so right now I have a 5-year-old. She just turned 5 a little bit ago. And then I have a 2.5 little.
Okay.
We're heading toward 3, but 2.5-ish. So, and they're very different personalities. And so this exercise has also been interesting for me to get a little insight into those little brains and how they work. So that's what's fun too, is because as I learned with this first sample that we're looking at here in front of us, every quilt really does tell a story.
Yes, absolutely.
And I thought I was just going to, take my older daughter when she was 3 and about 4 months old. And my toddler was a baby at the time, and it was nap time for the toddler, or for the now toddler, for the little one. And I thought I was just going to take my girl downstairs, and we were just going to, do something. Mommy just needed to sew something. Mommy just needed to sew something. So I had this cute little charm pack, a mini charm pack. At the time, most of the mini charm packs, I think, were only available from Moda. This is a Moda mini charm pack, which is pre-cut 2.5-inch squares. And there were 42 squares, which I think is pretty standard.
Yes.
So 42 makes a very nice 6x7 square doll quilt. So I thought I would take the squares and just scatter them on the floor and then have my daughter pick them up. And I thought I could get a nice little random assortment that way without having to belabor it. Maybe I'm the only one who works really hard to get a nice random placement.
Yes.
I underestimated her. As I said, she was 3 and 4 months. And I laid them down, and she started looking at them, and she started thinking about them. And she handed me 2 that I thought were a little too similar. No, do it again. Such a helpful mommy. Do it again. Give me 2. Give me one that's different. And so then I tried it. So I got maybe a random pair, and I stitched those. Give me another pair. And she kept giving me ones that were similar. And I thought, let's just go with it and see. And so that's what we did. She would hand me 2 squares, and I stitched them together. I was just chain piecing them. And then I cut the units apart, and I put them back down on the floor, and I said, now give me 2. And then I made my rows like that in the order that she gave them to me. At that point, once they were in units of 2 squares, it was more random because they weren't as similar. But what I love about this little doll quilt is that when you look at it, for the most part, you can see, if you look across the rows, how they're similar. So these 2 are
the same print, just different color.
Right. Same, very similar here. And I keep seeing these similarities. And so now we have this little doll quilt that gets quite a bit of use in their room. They play with it quite a bit. But I have this memory of her looking and thinking.
And playing the match game with charm squares.
Yeah. So that's just one idea. Depending on your child and or your grandchild or whoever, it could be fun just to see how do they interpret this request.
Yes.
So that was the first time we did that. And it also features very bad free motion quilting on my part.
But when I talk about free motion quilting, I say practice on something that it's not critical.
Exactly, and it was not critical on this, and so that's a whole other episode that we're going to have to do because you're getting really good at free motion, and I need some help. But anyway, But we have this, we play with it, it's perfect. I
It's
love
wonderful.
it. I love it. So that was the first one. So then not long ago, I decided to try this same thing with my now toddler, who, like I said, 2 and 6, 7 months.
So a
in there.
little younger than the
A little
older child
younger.
when she did the first quilt.
Yeah, and actually, I guess, developmentally, that's a pretty big difference. What is
Yes.
that, 9 months or so?
Yes.
So a lot happens in that 9 months. Plus, they are, as I said, different people. So I had a charm pack. This time, there's a lot more variety, just even the past couple of years. Everybody's
Right.
getting into doing their own pre-cuts these days.
That's
so you
right.
can find one. I had one similar to this, not exactly the same, but very similar. Again, 42 squares. Laid them out on the floor, and man, she just started scooping them up in her fist and throwing them.
Yes, different personalities.
Yeah, except for up here, as you can see, where you've got these 2 blue and the 1 white. I hadn't quite even gotten them all separated and scattered around
Yes.
before she was starting to scoop them up and throw them at me. So I thought, I'm just going to go with it. If that's what so a couple of times she gave me 3 at a time, but for the most part they were 2 at a time. But she was just going for the gusto,
Yes.
and that's very
Very much like her.
very much like her. She has her methodical moments too, but that's very much like her. So this is her quilt, and I love it because it reminds me of her.
Yes.
And I put this fun map fabric on the back. I love this fabric.
Yes, that's nice.
So it has a dual purpose. They can play adventure with it too. But anyway.
Yes.
So that was that experiment. And it'll be interesting if I try it again with her maybe in another year to see if she gets matchy-matchy about it or
Yes.
something. So
Yes.
that'll be fun. The next project I did was with my older daughter, who, as I said, is about 5. This was soon after her 5th birthday. I had a charm pack. This time I went with a 5-inch charm pack of blenders, nice modeled blenders. And what I did is I took, I think 8 of them, 9 of them, a couple handfuls, and I cut some of them into just half-square triangles. And then another couple handfuls I cut into 1 rectangle and 2 squares. So because it starts out at 5 inches, if you measure right from the outside of the pinked edge, as we
Right.
were discussing, sometimes finding that exact outside edge can be a little tricky, but we'll get to that. Even backing up, though, I starched these heavily.
Because you're going to be dealing with bias edges, and they're going to be handled a lot by a preschooler who's not
Exactly.
necessarily careful.
Exactly. Again, she's a little more careful than her younger sister, but still, there was going to be some handling going on. So starched them heavily. Then with this couple of handfuls, I cut them directly in half, so 2.5 inches wide each. Then cut one of the rectangles into squares, so I had 2.5-inch squares, and then I trimmed the edge of the other rectangle so it's 4.5 inches. So the idea being all of the units would finish at 4 inches.
Right.
A unit of 2 half-square triangles. It's funny, in a pattern that we gave, when we write a pattern and we want the finished half-square triangle unit to finish at 4 inches, we're going to instruct you to cut your squares at 4 7/8 inch.
Right.
This is a 5-inch square, and I thought, well, I'll just cut them, and I'll trim them up later. I didn't need to trim them.
Because you've got a charm square with pinked edges.
Pinked edges made a difference, as well as my daughter wanted to, quote-unquote, help me sew. So she was sitting
Okay.
on my lap, and so I was sort of looking around, and so, maybe my seam allowances weren't always the perfect
Totally
scant
accurate.
1/4 inch, so I wouldn't suggest trimming down your charm squares. It worked out just fine.
Awesome.
So anyway, then I arranged these squares, these shapes on the table, and showed her what we were going to do. We were going to put triangles together to make a square, put 2 rectangles together to make a square, put 4 small squares together to make a big square. And she got it. She's been through a year of preschool. She's going into kindergarten. She got it, but she couldn't get out of the matchy thing. So this right here, this was her first square.
Yes, yes.
Pink, because pink. And she wanted them to be together. And she did not want to give up this square.
Okay.
And in fact, when it came time to lay out the quilt, I had to coax her into sacrificing her pink square.
And putting it in the quilt.
And putting it in the quilt. There may have been a tear or two shed. She got over it, but she really played it up. So she started out with this. Then she got a little more adventurous, and she chose these two here, similar. But then she got more interested in it and less interested in the matchy-matchy and more interested in making the shapes. And so we did that, and I sewed these together. And then I laid them out on the floor, and she arranged them in rows.
Yes.
And I did my best to maintain the orientation and just to stitch them together, and I just love it.
It's wonderful.
It
really has a real modern look to it.
I would never be able to do this. Again, I would overthink it. And this is truly random. I mean, I'm not trying to say that my child is some modern artistic genius.
Right, I hear you.
Yet. But she, it really has a wonderful random assortment, and it gives me ideas of layouts that I might not have thought of otherwise. And so that was fun. That was another thing. It was just a couple of, well, let's put it this way. We were able to do it during the toddler's nap time. So again, good use of time. Not something that you can send them off to do all on their own at this point. There's, it's still very much a hands-on and something we do together. But it's nice when mommy wants to cut some fabric and sew and play with it. It's a way to involve. Now, you have a daughter, a grown daughter. And,
I do.
And you started sewing with her when she was?
She was little, probably 3 and a half. And she'd sit on my lap, and I'd run the foot pedal, and she would guide with her hands. And I'd go very, very slowly because I didn't want those little hands to get close to the needle.
Yeah, we talked about needles a lot.
She does not sew at all now.
Right. But you still started with her, but at 3 and a half. So I was starting to feel behind the curve when you were saying, well, I started when she was 3 and a half. You didn't say it like that. But I was hearing from other people saying, oh, she's ready. She's ready. You should start with her. So I thought, all right. I'm just afraid now that I've opened that Pandora's box that any time she hears the machine going, she's going to want to sit on my lap. And I can do it when it's something like that.
Right.
But
not on your things. Yes.
So here's my last project. Now we started this, again, this is with my older daughter during a toddler nap time. And as I said, my older daughter is, she's a little bit more careful. So this is based on the child's age as well as their temperament, very much so. But I wanted to start her with some hand stitching. I like to hand sew. We have hand sewing needles around, and I just wanted to start that. So what I did is I have this small embroidery hoop. I have no idea where I got it. I have it. I just hooped up just a single layer of fabric, scrap. And then I have Sashiko needles, which are, I should have opened this before, much thicker and blunter. I mean, they're really blunt. In fact, I bought them when I thought I was going to be using them for some big stitch hand quilting. I don't like these for big stitch hand quilting.
But
they're
for
too
a toddler,
blunt. I mean, feel the point there.
Oh, yes, it's really not a point.
No, I mean, you could put an eye out with it if you really tried. I mean, but, when you compare it against a between needle, I mean, it's just, there's no comparison. It's so much bigger.
And for the small motor skills of a toddler, this is much better.
Well, it's very thick and sturdy, and as we noted, that point is not very pointy.
So then you thread the needle
the,
for her, knot it?
I knotted it, and I knotted it. Talking like a preschooler. I had to coach her. I had to keep an eye on it because there were a number of times where she would bring the needle out the top and then bring it around to go back to the back and wonder what happened, and I had to back it up. So again, I don't recommend fine thread, chunky thread. I started out with some pearl cotton size 8. You could also use a size 5, which I don't like to use for quilting, but for a single layer of fabric would be perfect. But then to maintain her interest, I dug out some sparkly fabric thread. Now this is, as you can see, this is,
But you're threading again. So.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot of fun to have to keep rethreading it. But for just an afternoon's diversion activity while mommy was pressing some fabric for something else she was working on, it worked just fine. And so now I have this. What will I do with it? I don't know. Art quilt, maybe?
Art quilt?
Frame it?
frame it, hang it on the wall. She'd love it.
Just keep it for her trousseau. Does anybody still have a trousseau?
I don't think so.
But it was fun, and we haven't really done a lot of it since. But that time it was fun, and she has asked to do it again, so we'll continue that. And it was good, but only during the toddler's nap time, because she would want all the needles.
I'm sure.
That's who she is. So.
Well, Mary Kate, thank you for your wonderful ideas.
My pleasure.
Do be sure to watch Mary Kate's blog, because she'll be talking more about this as she goes along. Thank you for joining us today, and come back and see us again soon.
Quilters Newsletter TV, the quilters community, is brought to you by Handy Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.